I said, could we have done an assessment for him? Yeah, you're right, it is a mess. But the bad news for you is that the parts that are most messy are the parts that need to be done well in order to effectively outsource the testing. Planning, the analysis, the estimation, those things are going to have to stay in-house, and those are the things that are most broken. So you really can't outsource it. And he said, well, I don't quite understand that. I mean, what do you mean? I said, well, let me try a metaphor here. Suppose that you have a big bucket, and that bucket is full of spaghetti noodles, and you know, it's a mess, right? It's completely chaotic, but it's contained in the bucket. Okay, you take that bucket and you throw it over 2 oceans, and it lands in the Indian subcontinent. When it comes down, is it more organized or less organized? Do you have a smaller mess or a bigger mess to deal with? And that sort of clicked for him, like, oh yeah, there's going to be spaghetti everywhere. It's going to be a really big mess. And so, yeah, it's, you know, it's not. Right now, your mess is contained to right here, and it's somewhat of a manageable mess. But if you take a messy situation and just throw it over the fence, it's not going to turn out well. So what do we need to do this properly? Well, we've got to understand different life cycle implications, because sequential versus agile versus iterative versus spiral, these things matter when you're going to distribute the work. Just like if you're going to have gears in a gearbox in a car, you'd have to be gears that mesh. They can't just be randomly chosen gears. You have to look at, when you're doing outsourcing and distribution, you have to look at, are the people who are going to be doing the test work qualified to do the testing? All too often, outsourcing happens with, oh, well, we picked this development organization and we're going to have them do the testing too, without any assessment of they know anything about testing. Another mistake that you want to avoid is assuming that CMMI tells you anything about testing, because it actually doesn't say much of anything about it. And so, you know, the organizations run around going, oh, we're CMMI level 5, and that means that we test it thoroughly. No, actually, it doesn't take much of anything about your testing. It means that you've got a good software development process if you're doing everything that you claim to be doing. And we'll look at that in a minute. Logistics, planning and executing test logistics. This is probably when we look at clients that have had problems with automation, or with distribution, excuse me, this is probably one of the biggest issues that comes up over and over again, is just some boring piece of logistics was not properly planned for. I've been on projects where testing was blocked for a month because a server got stuck in customs, and nobody had thought through how we go to the border with money and pay the customs people and get the server out of customs and get it here. Simple stuff, excuse me, not stuff that takes a lot of time or effort to resolve, but if you don't think about it, it can create a huge obstacle. Planning for and managing the risks. Anytime you distribute work, there's more risk than if you did it co-located. Now, I'm not arguing against doing it. I mean, one of the services that my company provides is outsourcing of testing, so we believe that this can be done effectively, but realistic expectations all around are necessary, and people need to understand that there are risks that arise when you've got people in different time zones and different locations and so forth involved in the testing. There is a need for some amount of face-to-face relationship building and communication that should happen in these situations, so that when things go badly, and eventually, you know, there are always problems on a project, you're not trying to work through a stressful situation with somebody that you don't know and you don't trust. Cultures, you know, if we're doing distributed work, there can often be cultural differences, and you can't solve those. And there's not really anything to solve. It's not that there are problems, it's just that there are differences in culture that can lead to communication problems, probably one of the most frequent things, misunderstandings between people, because the ways of expressing yourself can be different in one culture to another. No big deal, as long as you understand, okay, you know, this way of communicating works in this culture, but not in this one. And then lastly, maintaining focus during execution is very important for distributed testing, that you don't get distracted by the crisis of the moment, the fire drill. Okay, I promised a little more information on CMMI, and just to put this out there right up front, I've got no problem with CMMI. We're working with a client right now to help them do CMMI and integrating test process improvement into the CMMI process, but it doesn't necessarily come for free. And so here's what I mean by that. If we look at this table, there are two kinds of numbers shown in this table. There's italics and boldface, and we basically have two sets of columns. We've got a column that shows the processes, what I'm calling the critical testing processes, and this comes from my book of the same name, and there are 12 of them. And then it has CMMI columns here and here. Now, so how does this work? Well, basically, where there's an italic number that's saying this is the level of CMMI that first starts to deal with or introduces some new element to the dealing with that particular process. Okay? The boldface numbers say this is the point where if somebody's applying CMMI really well, you can assume that this critical testing process is done well. So the short version of this slide is only 5 out of the 12 critical testing processes could you assume were being done well at CMMI level 5, right? So more than half of the processes could be not properly executed. And this is not to cast any stones at CMMI. That CMMI was not designed to deal with testing. Right? It was not. That's not the focus of it. So CMMI can establish a foundation for quality through good software development processes. But if you want to say, am I testing well? That's a separate assessment that you would have to look at. Okay. So why is distributed testing a best practice? What are the benefits of it? Well, the use of lower-priced labor, obviously, is the one that we hear about a lot, and and it is certainly a factor, and it is a benefit that can be realized if you do this intelligently. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that we don't want to buy an hour of someone's time. We want to buy a job well done, right? And the thing is, with testing and other parts of the software process, it's very hard to measure that compared to hardware, right? So hardware productivity is really pretty easy to measure. And you say, okay, I got a factory in Malaysia, say, and I'm building CD drives or DVD drives in this factory in Malaysia. Very easy to measure. I can look at my line reject rate. I can look at the time from initial design, delivering the initial design until the first unit comes off the line. I can look at the cost per unit. And this is pretty quantifiable stuff. It's hard to do that with testing because any metric that you might grab onto here tends to kind of twist in your hand on you. Like you say, oh, well, let's look at a cost per bug. Oh, yeah, you could do that, but that's an easily gameable metric. Just file more bug reports. Cost per bug goes down, right? They're crap bug reports, but I got a lot of them, right? Cost per test run. That's another gameable one. Okay, if I want to make my cost per test run go down, one way to do it is just do a sloppy job of running the test and don't pay a lot of attention to the details and just try to get through it as quickly as possible. So you have to be careful about this. I mean, there are ways to do this, but you need to be careful about thinking about, am I really receiving a benefit